What's good, y'all? Anderson Emerald here to talk about Athlos NYC 2025. Of course, I was on the ground on both Thursday night for the long jump and then also last night on Friday for the actual track meet at Icahn Stadium. Long jump, of course, was in Times Square. It was, some long nights. Of course, I was working, covering the meet. Check out all the kind of interviews, press conferences and stuff that, I got for Citius Mag up on the channel. So all that is up there. But today, I just want to dive in and talk about my experience on the ground, at Athlos in New York City, how it compares to last year. I know, of course, the long jump in Times Square, I guess watched on somebody was streaming live on YouTube. Of course, they didn't have an official stream, but I'm going to just talk a little bit about the experience there. And then I want to dive into some of the things in terms of what I think went well this year at Athlos, what I think didn't work well, and then also the future, what I'm excited for in terms of 2026, and then also what hesitations, I still have for next year and then the future of Athlos. But if you're new here, appreciate you. Hopefully you like this video. If you do, be sure to actually like the video. Consider subscribing. If you've been here already, always do appreciate you. Be sure to like the video so I can, of course, spread this out to more people and, we can continue to grow track and field. Now, let's dive in. Athlos 2025 went down in New York City. Athlos is the brainchild of Alexis Ohanian and his various different ventures, that he's trying to put forward in terms of growing women's sports. And here specifically is in the realm of track and field, our space, So we had the long jump in Times Square on Thursday, and then Friday was the full track meet similar to last year at Icahn Stadium in New York City on Randall's Island. The long jump in Times Square had Tara Davis-Woodhall, Quanisha Burks, Jasmine Moore, Jasmine Sawyers. You also had Clara Bryant. You also had Monet Nichols. So those 6 women, they were qualifying, competing in 4 rounds to qualify for the final, which went down on Friday night in Athlos, in Icahn Stadium. And that long jump pit was literally built up on the stage. That was actually pretty exciting. Tara, Quanisha, Jasmine Moore, and Jasmine Sawyers all advanced to Friday's competition. I'll talk about that in a little bit later on. Now, on Friday, you had the full Athlos track meet. That's where you had all the different events. Like I said, the long jump final, you also had the 100, the 200, the 400, the 100 hurdles, the 800, and you had the 1 mile. Of course, this is an all women's, track meet. It lasts about 2.5 hours, maybe a little bit less or so. So it moved relatively quick when talking about, the landscape of a track meet, but for the amount of events, maybe a little bit slower. Again, I'll talk about that in a second. A couple highlights just in terms of performances. Shout out to Brittany Brown, 100, 200, double, 10.99, breaking the 11-second barrier for the first time this year. And she also set a personal best of 21.89 seconds to get the 200-meter win. Huge performance for Brittany Brown. She got surgery at the very, very top of the year, dealing with her endometriosis. She, of course, had a slower start. Barely qualified for the, she didn't qualify for the USA team, had to go chase the wild card at the Diamond League final, won the Diamond League final, got 6th place at World Champs, but now caps off her season literally in the best form of the year because of that delay. Check out the interview on the Citius Mag YouTube channel. She kind of, broke things down. Brittany Brown, of course, that's the homie. She's, one of my favorite athletes, and she really does show up. I'll probably do a video on her at some point. Masai Russell, a little redemption after not getting a medal at the World Champs. She gets the win in the 100-meter hurdles. Performance and time is nothing too spectacular. It is what it is. Faith Kipyegon, she, doubles back from last year in the 15. She wins the 1 mile here over Gudaf Sagai. Keely Hodgkinson, she gets the 800-meter win here, 156. She looked comfortable. She looked cool. Marley DiPaulino, she wins the 400 over Sawi Nasser. Overall, I think probably many people would have been able to predict these winners, but I think the track competition wasn't too much of the focus, which again, I'll talk about what worked well and what didn't work well. Also, Tara Davis-Woodhall, she did win the long jump. She jumped 7.13 meters, which was really spectacular. Again, I'll talk about that in a second. And she actually won both competitions in Times Square, the qualifying, and then also the final yesterday on Friday. Now, just the experience on the ground in Times Square, the long jump in Times Square was set up, I think, beautifully. I didn't know what to expect, considering obviously I live here in New York City. I don't go to Times Square frequently, like no New Yorker does, unless you live or work there. But it was set up really nice, and it gave the opportunity. It had one side for just a whole bunch of fans. The other side was essentially blocked off because they had like some things just there for like setup and wiring, whatever. So it was a little cramped, I would say. I was in the media, so I was a little bit closer. I'll try and put up some clips, but I was like right in front of the long jump pit. It was a little cramped because of just how Times Square is set up. So I think this is maybe one of the challenges I'll talk about, where there were a lot of casual people who were walking by, but maybe they didn't get the opportunity to come and actually watch because there wasn't any place for you to just like, hop in, watch, and then leave, because it was already packed. Like, people knew this was happening in terms of their promotion, and they brought people out, so it was already a little packed there. But I do think it was a really, really dope experience. This was a party in time. This is a real party in the middle of Times Square. Obviously, there's been other street meets that have been done all around the world, specifically in Europe, and more specifically when we're talking about the long jump. But speaking to the athletes, someone like Monet Nichols, she explicitly said that this was very, very different, just because of all the lights, just because of all the crowd, doing it at night. Like, it was a very different experience than what you might get in different European cities, in these street meet competitions. So I really did like the atmosphere of this long jump competition. Now, the marks, the actual kind of measurements, I'll be honest, those were kind of sketchy. Jasmine Sawyers, she jumped 677 on her first jump, and then they later on, like way after the competition, said that, it wasn't legal, but she was still advanced. Again, weird stuff. Even Tara's last jump, weird stuff going on. But I will say the overall experience in Times Square, this was something that was exciting. I felt like there was a moment I was like, hold up, like, I'm here for track and field for a long jump competition in the middle of Times Square. Like, it was wild. It was actually wild. So shout out to Alexis Ohanian for putting this together. Shout out to Tara Davis-Woodhall for thinking of this and putting it together. Now, in the stadium on Friday, this also was another celebration, another party, another just like extravaganza, kind of a capstone to the year to celebrate the athletes. And it felt very similar to last year. For the media side, we had a lot more structure and support and setup relative to last year at Icahn Stadium. But also for the fans, it felt like they went a little another level up relative to last year in terms of the excitement, in terms of the lights, in terms of all the extra things to make sure that fans remain engaged. Of course, the competition was going on. You had a whole bunch of celebrities. They had the VIP area right by the track. Of course, Sierra performed at the end of the night. I mean, overall, amazing performance. Shout out to everybody. I mean, there's a tons of people who know who y'all are. Everyone was doing some great work out there last night at Athlos. Yeah, just pretty much a huge celebration catered around a track meet is what I'll say. So let's first dive into what worked well, and then I'll dive into what didn't work well. Again, what worked well is this felt like a true celebration of the athletes and of track and field. It almost felt like, okay, like I said, Brittany Brown, she didn't have an amazing year because of, the surgery she dealt with and the setbacks and everything, but it felt like she was being celebrated as one of the best athletes in the world. 21.89 is the third fastest time in the world, or third fastest, performer in the world behind, Melissa and Julian Alfred. So shout out to Brittany Brown, but it felt like she was being celebrated. It felt like Masai Russell was being celebrated. She said like, yo, Serena knew who I was, right? I mean, obviously she's the Olympic champion. And yes, Serena is like one of the greatest athletes in history and one of the most famous people, in the world, but Masai felt like she was celebrated. Keely, Faith, all these women felt like, okay, like this is a celebration. Let's end off the season. Let's party. Let's enjoy ourselves. The races don't mean as much, relative to a world champs or USA's or whatever, or Diamond League. It's just like, let's just have fun. So I really feel like the athletes felt celebrated. Even someone like Halima Nakai, who I spoke to, she didn't do as well in the 800, but she felt like, wow, like this was it. This was big. Same thing with like Megan Tapper, all these athletes who I spoke with. So that I felt, the atmosphere in Icahn, they really captured like a track and field party. It really was a track and field party. I know many people have been saying that, but being there in the stadium, and especially compared to last year, this felt like a bigger party. I really did love that, and that did work very, very well. The other thing kind of, attached to that was there was a ton of celebrities, like a ton of celebrities. You're talking about Issa Rae was there, Queen Latifah was there, Flavor Flav was there, Marquez Brownlee, right, the tech reviewer, he was there. Obviously Serena Williams was giving out the crowns. You had Kid Mero, right? You had Sierra, of course, performing. And this is only people who I just explicitly saw and was either walking past and like I knew. There was a ton of other celebrities and people that I don't know. I mean, we're in 2025. There's pockets of different celebrities. This was big. Like, there were so many people. And what I loved about this is there was just these celebrities who are non-track and field people coming from the outside of our sport and tapping in, actually attending the events and engaging with, our sport to a degree. I think that really was something that was executed very well. So shout out to just getting more eyes on the sport in a different realm in some capacity, right? On top of that, the focus was not on the results and the times and the marks. It was really on the competition. That I really do think worked well. It felt like it was important because then the athletes can just be celebrated for them competing as opposed to being celebrated for good or bad performances, right? And it almost felt like any athlete could compete to a degree. I don't know if this is a good or a bad thing, but because there was not much focus on the results and the times and the marks, it did feel like you can place any athlete there and we would still get the same vibe and enjoyment of the competition, of the, of the meet, of the, everything that was going on. That's why I think the focusing on the competition at this meet was a very, very positive, aspect as opposed to looking at the results. I mean, Marlita Paulino, she ran 50, I don't even know. She ran like 50-point low or something like that. But when she crossed the line, I was like, okay, cool. But I still felt the energy of the meet and Athlos. So that's something that I really do think was pretty cool. The last thing here is the long jump. Like I said, in Times Square, it really felt like an amazing spectacle. And I almost compare it to Mondo versus Karsten from last year, which, I had the privilege of attending as well. It really felt very different from just a track meet and felt like, okay, wow, like this is the focus. Long jump is where all the eyes are on right now. There's like a special setup around it, of course, in Times Square, even in Icahn on the stage. It felt like a very, very kind of like intriguing thing to really dive into. And I do feel like they executed that aspect very well, making sure that the focus was on the long jump, the focus could be on those athletes, and the focus could be, on celebrating them once again. As I've been kind of circling back, that celebration is really, really cool. So I do like that. I did really like that. Now, that was great. Let's talk about some things that I think didn't work well. Times Square. I noted this a little bit earlier, but the setup in general, the atmosphere was captured, but it wasn't a great setup for the idea of someone random could just be walking by and get interested of like, oh, what's going on? Because like I said, it was already packed. Like, there was not enough space to have, so many people just like coming in and out. It was already packed. They had people actually on the street saying like, you can't stand there, right? Like, so it's not a way, it wasn't set up in a way for people to just be captured by, oh, like long jump is going on, let me stop here for a second and then let me leave. They didn't get, permits to be able to block the streets in Times Square. I mean, who knows how much that would have cost? I don't know but that's a whole thing. The other thing is like, you had all the lights of Times Square, but then you didn't have like any visuals. They did put one of the billboards in Times Square did show Athlos and just like a highlight reel, but it wasn't like, you couldn't see the athletes jumping on, some of the billboards that were on the side. Again, I'll try and put some like screen grabs up or some clips up, but like you didn't have it on the sides for like people who might be around to see what's going on. And because of how crowded it was just around, you might not have been able to see it. So that, I don't think the actual structure and physical setup, it looked great, but it didn't work well. Those things can kind of live in tandem. The second and probably more important thing is it was October in New York City. It was cold, especially Thursday. Thursday was chilly. Yesterday was chilly and windy too on Friday. So listen, again, it's October in New York City. Like, listen, the athletes, they were warming up in Times Square. They were warming up on the street a little bit. They did have a trailer for them to like, hold their stuff and stay warm. But like, honestly, and none of them like complained about it. Like, they love the atmosphere, but like, it's October in New York City. Like, it was chilly. So that was definitely one thing that wasn't great for sure, both Thursday and Friday. The third thing is that there was some random downtime between events on Friday in Icahn Stadium. which is interesting. I don't know. Obviously, there was like the celebration, there was the music, there was the dancing, there was all kinds of different things, but it felt like there was more downtime than needed between the different events going on. And I know they were doing the intros and all these different things, but even for me as media, where I spend a lot of time going back and forth between the media area to interview athletes and then going back to the track to watch the meet, I did not feel any pressure at all, like at all. And sometimes at meets, I feel a lot of pressure. Like at the Olympic Games, I was trying to watch the races and interview the athletes. I had to go from like underneath the track where I interview the athletes, run a couple floors up to go back to the track to, track level to watch. That is like, I gotta be quick. Here, easy peasy, because there was so much time. It was like 20 plus minutes between events. It just felt like, all right, what's going on right now? Like, I don't know, it felt kind of weird. So is what it is. The other two things I'll say is this didn't necessarily feel like a track meet. Like I said, it just felt like more of a party and a celebration as opposed to the track. There's very little, I don't know, of course the competition is going on, but it just felt like there was little emphasis on the track, which obviously may be intentional, but maybe I feel like the balance wasn't as even as it needs to be. If you're trying to promote track and field and if you're trying to grow the sport, I feel like the balance is a little too heavy on the celebration and the fun as opposed to like the track aspect. Again, I don't know what that means long term for Athlos, for the sport, and we always want to see things different, but that's just my opinion in terms of like, all right, it felt like the track meet was very, 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 very secondary relative to let's just have fun out here. So the other thing was that the long jump results, I have to be completely honest, they were kind of wonky and a little arbitrary, I'll be honest. We saw that Jasmine Sawyers in Times Square, she jumped 6.77 meters on her first jump. They didn't measure it right, and later on, like after the competition, they eventually cut that off and they said that it was not appropriate, or it was marked inappropriately, but they still advanced her to Icahn Stadium, even though she eventually finished like 5th place, because they didn't identify that issue until much later. But then even Tara Davis-Woodhall, her last jump, it probably was a winning jump, I don't know, but her last jump in Times Square, they just didn't measure it right. Like they just didn't. Again, I'm standing right by the long jump. They didn't measure it right. And even beforehand in the competition, Tara was looking and was like, hold up, I don't think you measured Jasmine's jump right. She was kind of like skeptical about it. So I don't know. It was a little weird. It was a little weird. And it just seems like they, again, to the point of the marks and the times and all this stuff, like it doesn't matter. Last year we saw Jasmine Camacho Quinn false start, but then she was still allowed to run and she eventually won. I mean, they just want the competition, they just want the celebration, which again, that balance of, okay, is this a track meet that we want people to take seriously, or is this just a celebration to just see athletes go out there and compete? Like, I don't know. That's where, again, the long jump was wild. Hopefully I put some things up on the screen for you to see, but it was wild. It was wild. So it is what it is. What are some things I'm excited for next year? And then what are some worries and hesitations that I do have? I'm excited for a multi-series league in 2026 for the athletes to compete in. I think, obviously, this is something that we've been waiting for. We saw Grand Slam track, dip its toes. Unfortunately, it didn't go well this year. They had to cancel their 2025 season, of course, having the financial issues. And we've seen other leagues in the past, but this I'm excited for. Alexis seems to be going at a slower pace, doing one meet last year, one meet this year, and then now branching out to a league next year. I think that's going to be pretty big. Of course, he's getting input from Tara, from Gabby, from Sha'Carri. Most of the other athletes have been saying like, yeah, I'm not involved. It's been, Gabby, Tara, and Sha'Carri who have been like giving input. So I'm excited. I'm excited for a league for athletes to compete in. That's something that we've been always looking forward to. Shout out to Coach Rob. You can, of course, check out a bunch of his videos kind of breaking things down. The other thing is that there's going to be multiple meets ending in a championship celebration next year. Now, let me pause on maybe celebration, but according to Athlos, multiple meets in the league will end off in a championship. So that I think is going to be exciting because once again, you can have a series of different meets, but we want to make sure there's some sort of capstone, of everything. Obviously, we go through the entire year and we get to the World Championships, or even more so, we go through the year and we get to the Diamond League final, right? So I think it'll be good to have a league ending off in a championships. The other thing is that I'm excited to see more of the athletes being highlighted by other people outside of the track world. As I said, we saw a bunch of celebrities actually on the ground here in New York City for Athlos, and I'm excited to see how that grows in 2026, where maybe you do have more celebrities and more people outside of track and field appreciating and highlighting these athletes from all different levels, right? A Brittany Brown, and a Navia Battle, Georgia Hunter-Bell, whoever else, right? I'm just thinking off the top of my head, but all these different women who actually have competed, how can they get highlighted by people who are not as familiar with track and field, and how that translates to the individual meets, that will occur throughout this league next year. I think that'll be pretty big. The other thing is just simply more track and field. For me on a personal level, just the fact that we get to see more track and field competition, that is beyond exciting. Obviously, I haven't been talking about the track competition as much in this video, but I was very excited to see Brittany Brown run 21.89, run a personal best in October. Like, that's big, right? Running sub 11 seconds in October, that's big. Keely running 156. Like, all these performances are really, really big as a track fan. And now next year, with their league, with multiple meets, we simply get to see more track. So that's very, very exciting for 2026, though there's still a ton of details in terms of what the league will look like. Now, a few things that I'm a little bit worried about to close off. One, will every meet next year be this grand and flashy? Like I've been saying, and the main theme is that this has been like a celebration and a party for athletes in New York City, between last year and this year. Is that going to happen for every meet as part of the league, or will that only be the last championship meet, right? And then the other meets will be a little bit more quote unquote normal in a sense. And then what will that be? Like, are expectations set that Athlos is this kind of vibe? Or will they have to tone things down for the first couple meets and then make sure they communicate the championship is going to be the big flashy celebration? I don't know. That's something that I'll think about. And maybe I have a worry about, because like I was talking about, people outside of the sports world, do they have an expectation and a feeling of what the Athlos vibe is? And if they don't get that for some of the early meets, will there be a disappointment? I don't know. That's something to think about. The late season meets. This is going to be an issue, right? I think this is going to be an issue, depending on where they do go, but for two reasons. One, because it's happening after the World Championships and after, World Ultimate Champs, after everything at the end of the year. So we're talking, late September, October, maybe November, however many meets they do. That's going to be the very, very end of athlete season. There were literally some athletes saying, like, after World Champs, like, I need to train, or maybe I took time off, and, this is, there was athletes saying that. Now, when they go into next year and they're competing in a league, are they going to take it as seriously because of how late in the season it is? And on top of that, depending on where it's located, I'd venture to guess that New York City will still be one of the cities. It's going to be cold. Like, it's going to be cold as we get later in the year in New York City. So that's something to take into consideration, for 2026, and something I do have a little bit of a worry on. And then the last thing is, and especially coming off of, what we saw from Grand Slam track and everything that unfolded, will this always be something that will grow, be profitable, be sustainable, and not just a one-off or, whatever? Okay, we did a league this year. I don't know if we could do it the next year, this, that, whatever. Again, Alexis Ohanian is a different, person and a different entity as it relates to what we saw from Grand Slam track. But it's still the idea that, I guess he forever gonna, I don't know if it's gonna be a money losing venture, but Alexis in the press conference, he said they're making millions in revenue this year. I don't know where that's coming from. I have no idea where that's coming from. And this is different from like the sponsorships, right? You can get sponsors and investors, but that's different from making revenue, right? That's different from like ticket sales and merch sales and all those kind of aspects. That's very different. And revenue does not necessarily mean your net profit, right? What you eventually net and you make and being profitable, that's very different from what you actually generated, right? All the expenses, that's what you have to subtract from your gross. So that's interesting. Very, very interesting. Again, Alexis said they're making millions in revenue this year. Didn't say he's going to be profitable. He said that, it's a long-term thing for it to be profitable. But I think just coming off what we saw from Grand Slam track, and like, it's very important that we do make sure that this is hopefully something that's sustainable and not something that's just like dip in and then out. Because if we have another thing, if we as in like the track and field community, if we lose something else, in the track world, then people are just going to be more and more skeptical of actually investing into track and field. That's always something that I have on the back of my mind. as we want to grow into, you know, a more respectable, you know, sport, you know, right? Like a high profile sport similar to other, you know, big sports that we have in the US, whether it's the NFL, the NBA, the MLB, whatever. In my opinion, we'll never reach that level because we're just different. But if we want to be respected, you know, in some capacity like those, or at least a fraction of the capacity, then we have to maintain our credibility. And that comes in the form of, you know, sustainability in the things that are actually being put up in track and field. So I don't know. I will say, the last thing I'll say, if you made it to the end of this video, shout out to you. It's dope that the athletes are getting paid, but it's just so weird. It's like, one of the criticisms, I don't know if I did on video, but it was like Grand Slam track was doing a very, very heavy focus on the money, you know, that they were paying athletes. It's like 100K, 60K, like all that. I don't want Athlos and even World Ultimate Champion, I don't want us to fall down that rabbit hole of like the money is the focus, because then that takes away from the sport. I think athletes should be compensated very, very well and fairly, but I don't want that to be the main incentive and like what's being, you know, kind of broadcast out to the world of like, oh, this athlete's getting paid this athlete just got their money. It's like, and even like athletes just getting their money through Cash App, it's fine. But also, like, we got to be honest, like, obviously you have to understand there's like protocols in terms of like drug testing and different things like that, where we never even thought about the idea that diamond leagues don't pay their athletes or very quickly, or even world, you know, championships don't pay their athletes like immediately, because it wasn't something to think about. Now, athletes did get paid eventually, but it wasn't immediately because there's various different protocols that are in place. Now, this isn't to say that athletes shouldn't get paid immediately, but I mean, I don't know. I guess there's just some questions I have of like, okay, pay athletes immediately, but also make sure all these other protocols are in place to make sure we're not like taking away from the integrity of our sport. So I don't know. That's the last thing that I'll say. This went way longer than I expected, but if you got to the end of the video, be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. If you actually attended Athlos in person, whether it's Thursday in Times Square or Friday in Icahn Stadium, let me know what you thought, what your experience was. If you watched from home on Friday, or if you got, you know, maybe janky stream on Thursday, let me know what you thought about the experience overall, and let me know what you think about the future of Athlos. Those are my thoughts. Be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. Truly do appreciate y'all. Thanks for watching.